Welcome. So in this video, we will be going over graphing. So I'm just going to do some introduction to graphing for those who are very new to graphing and are very new to using the coordinate plane. So the coordinate plane consists of two different axes, your x and y axes. So let's go to the coordinate plane. You have your x-axis here, which moves left to right. To the left, it becomes negative. To the right, it becomes positive. This is the x-axis. The y-axis is the up and down. So as you go down, it's negative, up, positive. So when you graph points on the coordinate plane, you graph them x before y, just like the alphabet. So when x is 2 here and y is 3, that is where you plot the point. And that is how you find points on the coordinate plane. They're always in the corners, where the two numbers meet. Of course, you could also do, 2.5 and 3. But when you're kind of starting out graphing, you're really going to just have whole numbers. You can have 2.5, 3, but you're just going to really deal with whole numbers with graphing. So, with linear equations, you're going to have y and x intercepts. You also have, on the coordinate plane, you can have horizontal lines, vertical lines, and we're going to go over slope and slope-intercept form. So slope-intercept form is the y equals mx plus b format. M stands for slope, x and y are the coordinates you'll see, and b is your y-intercept. So it'll make more sense once we come here. So remember, slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. So let's say I have y equals 2x plus 3. 2 is the slope and 3 is the y-intercept. So what is y-intercept? It's where it hits on the y-axis. You can see there, it hits on the y-axis. What is x-intercept? X is where it hits on the x-axis. So for the y-intercept, your x-coordinate is always 0. And for the x-intercept, your y-coordinate is always 0. It's reverse. So I have this equation, y equals 2x plus 3. If I plugged in a 0 for x, I would get a 3 for y, which is this. That's at 0 for x, 3 for y. If I plugged in a 0 for y and solved for x, but you should already know how to solve equations very well before you even get into graphing. So if I solved for x, I would get negative 1.5, which is what we have on this graph. Negative 1.50. So when y is 0, x was negative 1.5. So that's x and y-intercept. So now, what is slope? Slope is the distance from point to point. So being that this is a linear equation, that means its slope is consistent. So this slope goes up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1. So if we were to scroll out, it would be the same. You find the points, up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1. Slope is consistent. It's the distance from point to point. So just by looking at something in slope-intercept form, I can see what the slope is. And so you can rearrange this. We have slope-intercept form in graphing. We have standard form in graphing. And we have point slope. Let me actually show you the 3 different ones. It's kind of weird when I type it. So when you are learning to solving equations, before you even get into graphing, they teach you how to rearrange equations, right? You're pretty much rearranging equations when you're solving equations, and you're learning how to isolate the variable and solve for x. So they teach you solving equations before graphing because you're going to be dealing with equations quite a bit. And so you must know how to rearrange equations. So let me actually go to this formula sheet that I have. Okay, so here, this is a lot of what you'll be using when you're doing graphing stuff. So just ignore everything else on this page. So slope is the distance from point to point. You can find it by finding the change of y over the change of x, because slope is the change of y, which is up and down, over the change of x, which is always to the right. Point slope form looks like this. Slope intercept form looks like this. Standard form looks like this. So don't worry, I'll go over each one. So let's say I was told to find the slope of this line. This point's at 0, 3, and this point's at -1, -1, 1. So remember, it goes x before y, x before y. So you always read your graphs left to right like you read a book. So if I were to read this graph left to right, this point would come first and this point would come next. So now, without even looking at the graph, I can find slope, right? We know slope is up 2 over 1, but we can find it in different ways. We can find it by looking at the equation in slope-intercept form. We can find it by knowing the two coordinates and finding the change of y over the change of x, which would get us 2 over 1, which is 2. We could find it in different ways. There's different ways to use to find slope, which I did discuss in other videos. So now I could rearrange this equation if I wanted to. Right now it's in slope-intercept form. I can put this in standard form. So all I would have to do is minus y to the right and -3 to the left. So if I did that, I would get this, and standard form means x comes first, y comes second, and then it's the constant. And so this in standard form would be this. So if I were to write it, it's the same line. You can see it's the same line, right? I can also put this in point slope form. Point slope form is your y minus your y1. So let's say we'll just use this point, 0, 3. y1, which is 3, equals my slope, which is 2, and then x minus the x value. So now let's plug this in. If I did y minus 3 equals 2 times x minus 0, it's the same line. So you can rearrange equations, and so don't worry too much about writing things in standard and point slope form. You should focus on that once you already are more comfortable with graphing. So in graphing, we also have horizontal lines. These do not go up, right? They go up 0 over 1. They go over 1, over 1, over 1. These have 0 slopes. And horizontal lines will always say y equals, y equals 5, y equals 3, y equals 2. Those are always horizontal lines. Vertical lines have undefined slopes because they go up 1 and over 0. So 1 divided by 0 is undefined. So these have undefined slopes. And so that's pretty much an introduction to graphing. You should kind of play around with the graph, look at things in slope-intercept form. You can see here they tell you how to graph something in slope-intercept form, which is actually very simple. To graph something in slope-intercept form, let's say I was told to graph this. Y equals 2x plus 3. Let's say I was told to graph this without the calculator doing it for me. This is my y-intercept, which is on the y-axis, and this is my slope, up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1. There we go. There's my line, and then I would draw the line. So you graph the y-intercept, and then you use the slope to find the other points, because slope is the distance from point to point. Let me know if you have any questions. Good luck.